Thank you for letting me occupy your panorama for about 10 minutes this morning. You're going to see a bunch of great presentations today and the next couple of days that showcase how market researchers have gotten really good at measuring what happened yesterday, monitoring what people are saying today. But there's a long way to go yet in getting better at forecasting what's going to happen tomorrow, and I would argue that there's not a business enterprise represented in this room today that wouldn't benefit from a more reliable view into the future. So we set out to use this very large consumer database that we've built running polls for the last 5+ years to see if we could experiment with new ways to improve on traditional techniques for using surveys to forecast, say, new product innovation, media consumption, and what have you. One important thing to understand about our database is that it's actually somewhat sparse. We've surveyed tens of millions of people, and they've given hundreds of millions of answers to thousands of different questions, but most of those people have only answered some subset of that large survey. So we rely on data mining technology that we've developed to crawl around in all of that data to find relationships and patterns, to look for things maybe you wouldn't think to look for or that you would never expect to be related to one another, and I'll explain why that's relevant to this research in a minute. When we study relationships, say, between the kind of car someone drives and the political issues they care about, those are pretty easy things to find. But when you start to study consumers over time who've answered surveys over time, you're able to uncover some latent things about them that aren't maybe derived from one single answer to a question. Might be, for example, that they're an early adopter, right? If we know somebody always seems to like the next new piece of technology, that's a pattern. Maybe they're a discriminating shopper in the way that they buy and the amount of money that they spend on things. Or for the purposes of this research, maybe they're really good at predicting the future. Now, traditionally, survey research has been used to try to project forward using a very logical framework. I'm going to find a consumer, probably one who's used my product or intends to see my movie. I'm going to ask them their opinion. Then I'm going to find 999 other people like that, try to model them to look exactly like the US population, and project all of that forward. But is that really the right way to do it? Maybe I haven't tried your product and I don't intend to see your movie, but my wife is. My colleagues at work talk about it all the time. My favorite writers write about it. Does that make me any less able to judge the future or the trajectory or even the quality of that product? We would argue no. In fact, if we find people that happen to be really good at absorbing and processing that kind of external information, they might actually be better at giving you insight in the future of your product or the potential of your movie than the person who's actually going to go see it. Now, if any of you are familiar with Dr. Tetlock's famed Foxes and Hedgehogs research, really brought into vogue by Nate Silver last year, a lot of these predictive capabilities tend to result from everything from cognition, ability to process information, lack of bias, and so on. The research I'm going to show you over the next 6.5 minutes is rooted in some fairly simple premises that most of you should be able to get your head around. One, as we scour the internet, we should be able to find people who take our polls who exhibit both the characteristics and the performance of a good predictor. Two, by studying those people and all the thousands of other things we can observe and infer about them based on all of the other data in our database, we can find patterns and correlations to help us find more people like that in the future. In this case, we're actually embracing bias. We're not trying to meter it out of our data at all. We learned, for example, that domain knowledge is very important. Finally, we can continue to study those people, put more and more refined groups of them together to make more accurate predictions moving forward. So the very first example, our first fun test of this capability, was research that we did in partnership with Dr. David Rothschild at Microsoft Research last spring, looking at the Oscars. And could we predict the whims of the 6,000 or so movie Academy voters who picked the Oscars? And we did this using what we call an expectation-style question, asking people who they thought would win. And there were two really important things we tried to prove in this research, and two things that Dr. Rothschild and his team discovered. One, we polled a lot of people randomly. Maybe they encountered us on a website that our polls were on, and they just happened to get a question about an Oscar category. We also created a destination website where people could come, answer all of the questions at once. And what Dr. Rothschild and his team found was two interesting things. One, people who came to our destination site early did really well, because they probably came to that site early because they care a lot about movies and they're well informed. The random people that we encountered did better as the Oscars got closer because they were exposed to more information they could compute. Heading to this year, we took all of that information and we built models of people who looked like those accurate predictors of last year. We studied all of the thousands of different things. We found out there were strong correlations to age, media consumption, even their political ideology. And when we looked at their predictions, we took the general population first. Not so good. The early predictors, which were people about a week before the Oscars and earlier. And then the late predictors, which were the people who looked like last year's good predictors, but in the waning days leading up to the awards. And as you can see, the Academy of Motion Pictures got all of the categories right except one. Like one person caught that joke, really? Okay, so then what? So let's take this and apply it to a real-life example that might mean more to all of you in the room. Let's look at something like television ratings, which are really difficult to get a handle on. Roughly shortly after the Oscars last year, we partnered with Dr. Jason Snyder and his team at the UCLA Anderson School of Management to examine, at this time, whether an expectation question, absent any analysis of who an expert was, but just simply whether an expectation question asked of the general population would perform better than an intention question asked of a known viewer of the television show. And this was sort of the headline of the research that they sent back to us. That simply just asking people who watch the show whether they think it's going to get better or worse is not a particularly reliable way to measure it going forward. Maybe I'm really biased. I can't tell you how many shows I've fallen in love with that went dead like 2 weeks after I did. If we look, one of the first shows we looked at was Vegas. The red line is our more popular expectation question. And you'll notice that it tracks fairly well with the actual performance of those shows after a small run. And certainly better than the intention question that had been asked. If there's some stats geeks out there and you want to talk about R squared later, find Ross McGowan, because I'm not the one to talk to about it. Similarly, we looked at the TV show Smash. Again, notice the large sample sizes here. These were 10,000 respondents that we were working with. Similar sort of pattern. We noticed that the red line tends to track much better to the actual ratings of the TV show than the green line, which was based on the intention of known viewers, the perception of the known viewers of the television show. So from there, we decided to go into the movie realm. Couple reasons. One, really frequent outputs, right? We know every Monday there's public data about, thanks to Rentrack and others, and Nielsen or whoever else does it, that tell us every Monday morning how the movies perform in the box office. But here, we didn't just compare the intention and the expectation question. We honed our expectation question at people that we had defined over time got better and better at predicting the performance of movies. And here's what we learned. Now, these numbers don't look quite as staggering. However, I would point out that movies is one place where people have gotten pretty good at gauging how a movie is going to do in the box office. Some of the tools are fairly reliable. There always is a surprise or two. But notice that even despite that, how much better both our expectation question performed in both groups, right, as opposed to are you intending to see the movie, and how significantly well it performed when we asked experts the expectation question. Notice large battery of films ranging from huge blockbusters to fairly small niche kinds of films, and it performed pretty well across both. So where are we taking it? We're in the middle right now of very exciting research with one of our favorite customers, who's a very large CPG brand who you all know, who owns one of the sort of iconic yogurt brands. And we are now experimenting with taking this technique and parlaying it forward to things like product innovation and investment. So we're taking this expectation concept and saying, which of these new features do you think would be more popular or would sell the best moving forward? And unfortunately, but for very obvious reasons, I can't tell you what those features are. First of all, we'd get fired, and so. But you'll notice, if you can, we've got 8 different product features scaled across the bottom. We've got 3 groups of respondents. We took the general population in blue. We took the green population, which are known users of the current brand of that yogurt, which is one group that on one hand you could see might be an expert, and on another hand might actually be biased. And then we looked at like this refined group of grocery shoppers. And you'll notice the variation across these different features. Now, it's going to be some time until we know exactly how well this works. We're going to need sales figures. We're going to have to do all of that kind of analysis. But so far, we're really excited about what we're seeing. So finally, I'm just going to leave you with this idea, what we are calling expectation science, which is asking every consumer who's good at predicting things what they think, modeling that against some traditional techniques for forecasting forward, getting better at it every day, learning a lot. We know that there are different predictors in different domain areas, so it's not a predictor who's good at everything. We know some people are good at movies, some are good at music, some are good at products. And we're continuing to plow more and more smarts back into the database as we learn more about each of them.